What is going on, everybody? AnimeScale here again, and as a result of my last poll, we have all the contenders of the Chunin exams ranked from weakest to strongest. We will skip the first part of the exam, the Forest of Death, to focus only on the fair 1v1s, the preliminaries, and the finals. Also, we are going to be looking at every genin at his strongest point. So, for example, we aren't going to be talking about Naruto in his fight against Kiba, but rather in his fight against Neji. Finally, these lists are always personal opinions, of course, and up for debate, so feel free to leave your list down in the comments below. Now, let's get into it. Sakura gets a lot of flack in the fandom for being, well, useless. She gets a lot more hate than she deserves, seeing as how she's pretty much Kage level by the end of the series. Unfortunately, this isn't that Sakura. Sakura in the Chunin exams was exactly as useless as people said she was. This Sakura isn't really good at anything, really. She doesn't have her famous physical strength yet, and doesn't know any medical ninjutsu either. Honestly, the only thing separating her from a random person is that she can use chakra a little bit. It's pretty safe to say she'd get destroyed fighting anyone on this list, which is why she's at the bottom. Everything just said about Sakura applies to Ino, as she isn't very great at anything and would probably handily lose to just about everyone else. The only difference is that Ino actually knows some of the Yamanaka clan's jutsu, which edges her just ahead of Sakura. The fight between the two was probably the worst fight in all of Part 1, being more of a street brawl than a duel between two ninjas. Thankfully, Tenten isn't nearly as weak as either Ino or Sakura. Tenten actually has a very defined set of skills, being a weapons specialist. So this means she's very proficient in using all kinds of weapons, primarily kunai and shuriken. Yes, I know what you're thinking, kunai and shuriken aren't exactly much to write home about in a show where someone used a jutsu to make the moon. Still, in this part of the series, the power scaling is a lot lower, to the point where even kunai are an actual threat. Still, her terrible showing against Temari still showed off just how weak she is against most capable ninja, which is why she's at a very low spot on this list. Tsurugi was one of the few ninjas sent alongside Kabuto to spy on the Leaf Village. As a ninja, he definitely has a lot more going for him than everyone we've talked about so far. He has an actual ability, for instance. He can stretch his body, basically allowing him to dislocate his own joints in order to get a crazy amount of flexibility. This ability actually sounds somewhat useful. We even saw him use this against Kankuro, where he constricted around him and threatened to break his neck. Somewhat amazingly, he somehow ended up doing this to Kankuro's puppet instead, who was dressed to look like him. Yep, not exactly the best look. Moving on, we have Kin. She actually has one of the most unique fighting styles amongst the competitors, as she uses needles to fight, which I'm pretty sure no one else does in the whole arc. Aside from just using them to, well, stab people, her needles are also attached with tiny bells. Using these bells, Kin is able to disorient her opponents, making them see hallucinations. In the show, she used them against Shikamaru to make him see multiple clones of her. Of course, Shikamaru being Shikamaru quickly saw through the trick. While she isn't very strong, she is certainly more capable than everyone else we've talked about so far. Choji probably has the shortest fight in the entire Chunin exams, and he lost. That's really not a good look. Still, the little we saw from him more than shows he would have had no problem with dealing with anyone below on the list. He just got unlucky. At this point, Choji was already capable of doubling in size and becoming a massive boulder, running people over. In this state, he was even capable of making a sizable hole in the wall, showing good destructive capabilities. Zaku is most famous for having his arms dislocated by Sasuke after he first got his curse mark. That might make you think he wouldn't be able to do anything later on, but you'd be wrong. Even with one arm, Zaku is able to emit strong shockwaves of sound from the pores in his palms. These are more than capable of doing more serious damage if you get hit by them directly. Not only does this make him a capable long-range fighter, but it also makes him deadly up close. That's not bad for a genin. Now we're just starting to get into the upper tiers of the genin at the Chunin exam. Just like the other sound ninjas, Dozu is able to use sound waves to his advantage. He can use them to confuse, disorient, or cause great pain by emitting sound from the speaker on his arm. Dozu is the reason Choji had the shortest fight in the exam, as he pretty much one-shot the young genin by using his whole body to conduct his sound waves. It's safe to say he's in a class above everyone else we've talked about so far. Kiba is a little hard to talk about. That's because his fight against Naruto ended up being more comedic relief than anything, with Kiba losing in, let's just say, one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Thanks to this, many people underrate him without understanding that he's actually pretty strong at this point in the story. For one thing, Kiba's fang over fang technique is no joke. Getting hit straight up by it will cause serious damage. Combine that with Kiba's decent taijutsu, and you have someone pretty capable. Now add to that the fact that Akamaru can use the transformation technique too, and you'll be dealing with two Kibas at once. That's more than enough to put him in this spot. Uri did pretty well in his fight against Sasuke. Now granted, in the preliminaries, Sasuke was fatigued. He couldn't use any ninjutsu because of the effects of the curse mark, but still, this guy put on a decent fight. Not only is he shown being physically strong, more than capable of making holes in the ground with just a kunai, he also has the most deadly power so far. Essentially, he can drain the chakra and the life force from anyone he touches. He can use this in his own jutsu, extending his own stamina. Not bad for a contender in the Chunin exams. It might not have ended that way, but at this point in the series, all of the Sand siblings were a force to be reckoned with. Kankuro himself was no joke either. Using his puppets, Kankuro can fight without ever directly having to put himself in danger. This is how in his fight against Tsurugi, he somehow managed to trick him with one of his puppets as if it was a clone instead. If his puppet does get a hold of you, it's probably immediately game over unless you have crazy physical strength. Kankuro was able to use his puppet to break every bone in Tsurugi's body, and unfortunately, his fight in the final never takes place. I'm sure we all had a physical reaction the first time we saw Shino and realized just what his powers were exactly. Still, being creepy aside, Shino's bugs are dangerous. Not only does he have access to pretty much any species his clan lets him have access to, but each species also has its own unique ability. In the Chunin exams, Shino used Kikai bugs, which were both capable of sucking all the chakra of their targets once they got onto them. This is especially broken once you consider the fact that these bugs can be as sneaky as he wants them to be. So your fight against Shino could be over long before you even realize it. Temari is most well known for almost immediately making Tenten irrelevant in Naruto. Their fight was a slaughter Tenten probably never recovered from. Using her fan, Temari can make large gusts that pack a ridiculous amount of force behind them. It only gets crazier later on in the series, but even now, getting hit by one of these does major damage. What really puts Temari so high up on this list is just how safe she can be when attacking everyone on a battlefield. Approaching her just makes you easier to hit, and running away is easier said than done with the range of her fan. All in all, she's a perfect ranged fighter. Shikamaru has one of the simplest and frankly underwhelming powers in the show. He can extend his shadow and grab other people's shadow before being able to control them. That's literally it. If his powers were all he had going for him, Shikamaru would be a lot lower on this list. Of course, we all know it isn't that simple. Shikamaru is a genius, and he knows every way possible to use his abilities to their absolute limit. This makes him a lot more dangerous, to the point where he pretty much beats Temari, someone he should otherwise have no business even fighting against. Hinata is the single most underrated character at this point in the story. Many people think she's a lot weaker than she really is because she lost her first fight pretty convincingly. People often forget that this fight was against Neji, someone who could convincingly beat most characters in this arc. She even put up a very solid fight, forcing Neji to have to take her seriously. She obviously has the Byakugan, one of the strongest dojutsu Kekkei Genkai around. This lets her use the Yuga fighting style, which also just so happens to be absolutely broken when used with a Byakugan. Hinata isn't quite as good at her clan's techniques as Neji is, which is why she ended up losing in the end. Still, it's safe to say she has a very good shot at beating everyone before her on this list, if of course she manages to keep the same determination shown against the prodigy of the Hyuga clan. Rock Lee doesn't have any special dojutsu or any secret clan technique. What he does have is a crazy work ethic and the results to show for it. Lee is a beast when it comes to taijutsu. Not only was he fast enough to make Sasuke look weak in their first encounter, and that was when he had weights on, but without his weights, Lee's speed increases even more, to the point where even Gaara's impenetrable defense has a hard time keeping up with it. In fact, he was responsible for giving Gaara his first injury ever. Oh, and he just so happens to be able to use the 8 gates, the single biggest power boost in all of Naruto. Going up to the 4th gate, Lee can increase all of his physical attributes many times at the cost of excruciating pain. It's safe to say he isn't someone anyone wants to mess with. This was a bit of a toss-up between putting Lee or Neji higher, but Neji won out in the end. Neji is a genius and much more capable with the Byakugan and his clan's techniques than Hinata is. Neji is arguably the most dangerous character up close, as it will only take him a single moment to completely seal his opponent's chakra points. It's up for debate if he would keep up with Lee, especially if he was using the 8 gates. Still, him being so deadly means Lee would only have to slip up for a single moment, as he did against Gaara, and the fight would be over. Neji might have even beaten Naruto if he didn't literally have the 9 tails inside of him, a being that made his clan's fighting style pointless. Naruto came back from his month-long training with Jiraiya as a different ninja. His fight against Kiba was, well, it didn't do him any favors. Thankfully, this version of Naruto is a lot more calm and collected, capable of giving the genius Neji a run for his money. Not only was he more than durable enough to tank all of Neji's attacks, but he was also capable of putting him down for good. Even sealing all of his chakra points didn't help, considering that he had Kurama, the hardest possible counter there could be for that fighting style. The only reason people might underestimate this version of Naruto is that they might not realize that he was holding back a lot. This fight was about proving something, rather than Naruto just instantly one-shotting Neji. This is something that gets pretty obvious later on in the arc. Gaara was menacing from the first moment we saw him. From everyone else in the exam, he was the one who always felt like the biggest threat. In the end, that proved right, with Gaara being able to handily beat Lee, someone far above most characters in the exam. His sand pretty much means that you simply can't hit him unless you are at least as fast as Lee, which not many people are. If you aren't, nothing you do will phase him. If you do end up being fast enough, you then have to hit hard enough to penetrate his sand armor that even Lee couldn't manage well enough. If you try to instead fight him from a distance, well, like with Temari, it won't be a good idea. Gaara can use his sand from very far away, striking and surrounding people with it. If he just happens to catch someone with it, he can crush their bodies instantly, which is basically an instant kill move. This version of Gaara more than deserves a high spot up on this list. Sasuke before his training with Kakashi and Sasuke after his training with Kakashi might as well be two different people. Before, Sasuke couldn't even keep up with Lee when he had his weights on. Afterwards, he was as fast as weightless Lee. He also just happened to have learned the Chidori, which, as we discussed, is more of an assassination technique than a jutsu. This Sasuke also pushed Gaara a lot harder than Lee ever did, going so far as to make him bleed and fully penetrating his sand armor. This was despite Gaara using his ultimate defense, something he never bothered using against Lee, and keep in mind that this Gaara was stronger than the one Lee faced in the preliminaries. Sasuke's Chidori would 100% have killed Gaara if he wasn't literally a Jinchuriki. Take everything we've said about Sasuke and add the curse mark power boost on top of it, and you'll get this version of the Uchiha. Not only are all of his physical attributes increased, but this curse mark also gives him access to a new reserve of chakra. Just keep in mind that at this point in the story, chakra was actually something everyone still had to worry about. Using the curse mark, Sasuke was able to use the Chidori more than his limit of twice a day and keep up with Gaara in his transformed state. Unfortunately, the strain placed on his body in this form isn't something he can handle, and this fight was a lot briefer than their last encounter. Gaara's Jinchuriki transformation is pretty unique as far as these things go. After every other Jinchuriki just starts leaking the chakra of their tail beasts, but Gaara's body starts turning into a tiny version of Shikaku. In this form, Gaara is much stronger. His strength mostly seems to depend on how much of his body is replicating Shikaku at any given point. In this form, Gaara is more than a match for Sasuke, even with his curse mark, showing off just how deadly he's gotten. If Gaara even happens to lose consciousness in this form, his tail beast will take over completely, amplifying his power even more. Yes, this version of Naruto is easily the strongest ninja in the Chunin exams by a mile. This is Naruto when he is really trying to go all out, not leaving anything on the table. When Naruto got serious, he was able to deal with the almost fully transformed Gaara, someone even Sasuke with his curse mark couldn't handle. This version of Naruto could have probably beaten everyone below him on the list at the exact same time. That's how absurdly strong he was. There's a reason he made Sasuke jealous. Only the writing made the Naruto vs Neji fight an actual fight, rather than a one-sided slaughter. This is the only reason why Naruto doesn't just one-shot Neji. by dropping his largest summon on his head. This brings us to Gamabunta versus Shikaku. While not genin, these two did play a pretty big part in the arc. Gamabunta is the strongest Toad summon around, and Shikaku is the weakest tail beast there is. All in all, the two seemed very evenly matched in their fight. Shikaku obviously wasn't going all out spamming tail beast bombs, and Gamabunta wasn't trying his hardest either. In the end, the difference between the two really just came down to Naruto's determination and the power of Talk no Jutsu. That's it for this list. What do you guys think about the Chunin exam power scaling? A lot of this list can go one way or the other, considering tactics played a pretty big role here, such as between Temari and Shikamaru. Still, I tried my best to scale them as accurately as I could. Feel free to leave your lists down below in the comments section, and I'll see you soon. This is AnimeScale out. Bye!